Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Youth and Inclusivity panel for today. And I'll preface before we go into the conversation with our panelists this afternoon that committing to achieving Agenda 2030 for sustainable development encompasses the goals and targets that should be met by all segments of society. Often those left behind are people living in poverty, crisis, or situations of vulnerability, and can include children, youth, persons with disability, older persons, indigenous peoples, refugees, and also migrants. Therefore, it is important that their voices be amplified and that they are meaningfully included as active agents of change. Now, our central interest for today, which we have a very able youth panel, and this youth-led panel is aimed at highlighting the role of youth in fostering a more inclusive society, as well as the need to meaningfully engage youth in decisions that affect them in the effort of leaving no one behind. So I have the privilege this afternoon to introduce Mr. Jahmel Brown, and he's researcher, citizen security and peace building, and YPS youth consultation. Please make him welcome. We also have Mr. Sean Lorde. He's director of youth programs, Equality for All Foundation. We also have Kerry-Ann Moses. She's an activist, member of WEChange Jamaica. And we also have Jada Powell, and she's co-producer of Talk Up Youth radio show. All right, so we would like to start our conversation this afternoon about inclusivity by, first of all, understanding inclusion. And we know that inclusion means the voices of everyone should be heard in policies, in dialogues, in discussions, in forums such as this. Therefore, please share with us, why is it important for young people like yourself to be involved in decision-making, especially in decisions that affect you?
Thank you so much for that question. No, it's often said youth are the future, but I think youth are the present, right? Right now, we need to try and engage as much as possible to have their voices heard, because they have so many important points on how we can change Jamaica, change the world, rather. And using this forum as a platform to do so, we can also see their viewpoints on how we can do that in a way they are engaged. So not just to take it off and say, okay, we have engaged youth, but how are we engaging them? And is it something that they are interested in? I think that's something that we can definitely think about.
So not just ticking the box,
not just ticking
really
the box.
Meaningfully engage them. Let's hear from you, Jahmel.
To me, before I get started, I'm coming from a place where youth inclusivity means a lot to me, and our decisions are weighed into society. So I'm coming from an inner city community called Tower Hill that is beside Waterhouse in St. Andrew, Jamaica. And when I first began coming into the space of youth inclusivity and youth leadership, I didn't see anybody that resembles me, coming from a non-traditional high school as well, turned high school, to be in a platform as this, because you always see someone who always speak well, who is coming from a traditional high school, and you're in the space weighing on decisions. You always the same youth that you will see in the space. You wouldn't see somebody from a different background. So what youth inclusivity and decision making means to me is that we have diversity, representation to impact that decision, because I can come from the inner city and impact someone's living in a higher complex neighborhood or somewhere more in the middle income. I know of my struggles, I know where I'm coming from, I could relate to me. Oftentimes we see in our society where persons are given the voice to have the voice or the opportunity to weigh in on decisions that they can't really relate to.
So representation at all levels, absolutely. A person who is perhaps from different stratas of society, especially we think that Jamaica is the urban, well, it is the urban area, but Kingston is Jamaica. And so if you don't have representation from rural persons, then it is not capturing that element to say you're representing youth. Let's hear from you, Sean.
As my colleague rightfully pointed out, youth inclusion to me means youth representation. It makes no sense youth don't have a voice as it relates to youth issues. And I strongly believe that inclusion means not just having youth as placeholders, but that our issues are brought to the fore by us and the necessary channels to remedy the situation happens.
Right, Jada?
I think we underestimate that youth aren't decision makers. Youth make decisions every day about the way that we live our lives, things that we do, and that is how our society will develop. So whether or not we are included in a meaningful way, or if we're just placeholders, we are making decisions every day that will impact the society that is to come. And so if we are not included in these discussions, in these higher level meetings, there's a disconnect. And that is where you see you have sustainable goals, but the goals are not being achieved by the persons in the community because they don't know about them. They're working on their own goals. And so we have to align goals and actions on the ground. So I think that's why it's so important to include us into the high level meetings in a meaningful way.
Absolutely.
I would say that is a good way of looking at things, because if we also take into consideration the perspective that youth would have and society as decision making would be different 10 years or 25 years ago, because after millennium goals and also the SDGs that were now included in our society, what youth would have wanted then is different from what youth would have wanted now. So there are so many different things that would have weighed in on decisions now for youth compared to then. So we have to also take into consideration that factor as well.
Yeah, you raised an excellent point that what inclusivity looks like 25 years or 10 years ago is certainly different from what it actually looks like today. It also perhaps requires us to redefine what is inclusivity. So you're raising some good points, and that
one last point. Inclusivity does not mean to be just included. It's meaning, like me, for example, I might be the first, not saying I'm the first, I might be the first to come from a non-traditional high school and also come from the inner city and be in this space. I am charting the path for others to come and be included into the space, to shape the decisions that are in the space as well. Because we are in the space, we need all youths, all perspectives, not just the one that speak well, look well, but we need the persons that are the average youth and the persons that are playing their part into society to share their perspective from different areas in society.
Absolutely. Right. Now that we have passed the COVID-19 pandemic, how are we going to integrate what we've learned, right? I've heard someone say, don't waste a pandemic. How are we going to move forward? Because now youth goals are much different as opposed to 2019. What are we doing to really connect with youths from all over Jamaica? That should also be considered as well.
Yes, some very important points being raised there. And we know certainly for, you had mentioned it, Jahmel, when we're looking at the Millennium Development Goals, a big drawback to that was that it was not inclusive. So we had persons representing opinions for persons who are living with HIV, and they weren't at the table when some of these policies and decisions were being made. and bring us in this century. We're talking about the Sustainable Development Goals. And if we're saying we're sprinting for the goals, we're trying to amplify and raise the voice of young people, you're saying that inclusivity has to look different than what it was 25 years ago.
Yes, it has to be. And also we have to take into the UN consideration of it, because the UN have a strategy, the strategy for youth as it relates to U 2030. So it's like Vision 2030, but different. It's a UN-wide system strategy that shapes youth involvement more into society.
Yes.
And in Jamaica, I think that we need a straightening after strategy here, because it's more international. So involve youth more into that.
So localizing the context to fit Jamaica, absolutely. Meet the people where they are. Absolutely. I like that, Jahmel. All right, so based on your experience, in what ways can youth contribute to advancing a more inclusive Jamaica? I know you would have mentioned some of the points before, but how can we really ensure that there is a robust system in place? And I'll turn my attention here before I go over to Jahmel. So based on your experience, in what ways can youth really contribute to advancing a more inclusive Jamaica?
So, as I said, youth are already determining what the future of this country will be. If we are not engaging youth from the beginning, then we're going to be going into very different directions. We have to give them space to dream, to imagine what their future can be without giving them these preconceived notions of what it's supposed to be. So space to dream, space to imagine what they think that their country can look like, and then how do we get there? So we start with the bigger picture, but we start with the youth in mind. We start with them leading the charge. It cannot be that we've decided for them what their future is going to look like.
I think youth should play an active role, and the word active was particularly selected. A lot of times youth, we're seen as just numbers, as just data, and yes, you collect our information, but then what happens after that? How do we participate in whatever process of change that you propose? And I believe that a key area that we should focus on is policy development. Young people, yeah, we might not know everything, but we know something. And use us now, in the now. Don't assume for us, for a better term, don't assume for us. Ask us the things, whether hard or not, and we will provide answers that you need. And then from there, we work together, collaboratively, to reach whatever we need to fix or reach.
Right. And just to highlight that point also is that when we were doing HIV response and we started our HIV response, what it required us to do was to do a lot of peer education, right? And the persons who were engaging in the program were only confined to that space. So it's the number of condoms that are distributed. It's the number of pairs that you reach. But at the core of it, you are seen, especially for marginalized populations, are only seen as perhaps vectors of, transmitting diseases. What about enabling them to learn about disaster risk reduction? That is something that affects us all. In terms of first aid, that is something that affects us all. So again, it goes back to your point, not only assisting based on perhaps how you identify as a young person, but really how do you provide resources, not just based on unattached youth in rural areas, vulnerable populations, but across the gamut, how do you engage young people? I'd like to find out, what do you think are the main challenges? If you could think of 3 main challenges and perhaps opportunities for Jamaica to become a more inclusive society.
Right.
So let's start with some of the challenges. What do you think are those barriers and roadblocks? So we hear the conversation, we want youth to be involved, but do you also think that there are barriers in getting youth to be mobilized and really active and engaged in the process?
Yes, most definitely. I think a large factor is education. 60% of the Jamaican population does not have a CXC subject. No, if we're talking youth inclusivity and SDGs and all of that, most of the population does not know what that means. So we have to start at the root. How do we educate them and let them understand what we're trying to say in a simpler format? And then from there, we can go again with change and how they can be included in that. Because how can you ask someone for their opinion if they don't know what they're responding to? How can they properly assess the situation? So I think we need to start from there, education, and also how we engage them. As I said, a lot of times when we are doing our polls or just trying to reach out to youth and finding out their issues, some persons may want to think of the solutions before they even ask the questions, right? So they come and they will ask you, what are you wearing? And you are wearing a blue jacket. And they expect it to say blue, but suppose you say purple, right? Your answers may be different, your perspectives may be different. So it's really for us to be open to what youth are saying and also take it into consideration.
So it's almost coming to the table, have a preconceived notion of what you think young people will say, but really and truly you have not heard from the youth themselves. And even when they put their voices in the space, it is also not taken as something that is within the remit of what you're working with.
Yes, yes.
Also, it's important to know that when reaching young persons, you have to meet them where they are, and also tailor your assistance to the community that you're reaching. So if you are trying to reach young persons living with HIV, you wouldn't necessarily use another format. You have to tailor the help to the community that you're trying to reach.
I think when we are trying to engage marginalized groups, such as youth, we have to think of all the things in their daily lives that are going to prevent them from accessing this space, prevent them from thinking about these problems, prevent them from thinking of the solutions. Is it that they are too caught up with school, university, with trying to pay off student loans that they don't have time to think about these things? How do we engage them, ensuring that their brain space is free enough to think of these things, to comment on these things, have an opinion, in the way that we do things at WEChange? When we want to reach a particular audience, we ensure that all the parameters are in place that they can't tell us no. If we want to do a training and we know you're from out of town and we want to engage persons who are not in the cities, we want people in rural areas, are we going to provide them with money to come to Kingston to do that training? If they have children, do we provide them with some kind of stipend where they can find someone to look after that child? Do they need food to come? Do they need to take a day off work? Do we provide them with something to say, you're not getting paid for today, but here's a stipend, here's a reason for you to come. These things are what affect people's decision-making on a very real level. So we want to engage youth. Is it that they don't have the time? Is it that they don't have the resources? How do we get these things to them so that they can free up their brain space to engage us on the topics that we want to speak about?
And just a follow-up question before you come in here. How do you mobilize resources from organizations, from agencies to reach the youth that are actually in need? How do you think, or what strategies can be put in place to really mobilize resources for young people?
Well, make it into your policy. Make it, if you're trying to reach a particular audience, again, you have to be intentional about it. You cannot say that I created this program for young people between the ages of 18 to 25, and it is going to start at 9 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, and end at 5 p.m. I'm not going to give them any food. I'm not going to give them any way to get here and expect to have a full audience. That's not realistic. And then at the end of the day, you don't meet your goal. And the organization that funded you is wondering why they give you all this money, what do you do with it? And so if you have to cut back on something else, maybe you can't do so much printing, maybe you can't have equipment, maybe it's just you speaking to them in a room, in a classroom somewhere, so that you can give them the resources they need to show up in that room.
And that is such an important point because we must remember people respond to incentives. So what are you incentivizing them with? It might not always be monetary incentives, but I believe, and it might not sound politically correct, but there is some sort of exploitation of youth where it's mainly give us your time. You don't have any resources, you don't have the wherewithal to do this, but give us your time for experience sake. We have to understand that we are at a particular time where things are hard. Inflation is a valid thing to just take into consideration, right? So try and understand what youths are really going through and see how best we can include them in policy making and decision changes.
Well, and I do agree that, can incentivize a lot of things, but incentives shouldn't always be monetary. I believe that when you're inviting young person to capacity building trainings and stuff, within itself, that is an incentive. But you can also have, let's say, certificates of participation, stuff that you can actually put on a resume that when they go into various spaces to apply for jobs and stuff, it shows that they have some capacity in the area. Give them a $5,000. I mean, by the end of the day, that's done. What happens after that?
So my issue is, after saying that youths are the future, it's not because youths are the now, because they are the now. It's because I've seen countless times where youth have not been given enough opportunities to capitalize on the future that we are hearing about, that the future that we need to be acquired. We're not getting anything on that. And that is what motivates me as a youth to share opportunities to over 4,000 youths and students across Jamaica at the University of the West Indies, different universities in Jamaica, and youth across Jamaica, high school students and different students, to give them a chance, because youth might want to get involved, but not in a static way, if I may say. They want to be involved. They could be a social advocate, using social media to advocate, because we're in the digital age. There's different ways youth can now use different ways and tools to benefit and include other people in the space, and also highlight certain issues in the space. You don't have to be a youth leader alone. You don't have to be a youth advocate alone. It can be other things. There's other ways that they can get involved. That's why I shared opportunities for students to also get involved in our society, Jamaica. And I was highlighted by the Caribbean, United Nations and UNESCO in the Caribbean for my work that would help youth and students find opportunities to get scholarships, internships, and also pursue other routes so they can get the best university experience and also the best youth experience possible, because we have to provide the avenue for them.
Yes, absolutely. I hear you saying that we're not supposed to be chasing after the future, but really living in the present and mobilizing those necessary resources to ensure that youth are included in
you have been saying.
Yes, absolutely. And I remember when we were talking before we started the forum, you said also that youth used to be attached to perhaps a political organization or some community groups, and you would have to wait until those groups are ready to activate and create the change that you want to see. But you're saying no longer that is happening. You are the one who is stepping forth and creating those organizations to effect the changes that you want to see.
With over 800 students and youth at first, sharing opportunities. I would have taken up myself, built my own platform, and helped students and youth in any way that I can. You don't have to wait on an organization to recognize your greatness. You don't have to wait on anyone to recognize your greatness. You are youth. Use the resources that are at hand. Social media is a powerful resource. We have the tools at hand. If our former generations or parents did have those tools, they would be better than us right now. So we have to take advantage of the tools that are presented to us now as youths.
Absolutely, absolutely. Just to also ask, in your different organizations and your communities, how have you been advocating or working to foster this inclusiveness that we're talking about?
I'll go. So at WEChange, we are youth-led, but we do engage our elders, those who have come before us in the struggle that we are also in. We try to learn from them. And I think that's a very important part of making sure that we are going in the right direction. You know, you have these conversations with persons that come before you, and there's again a disconnect of what they would have done, what you're doing, what they would do differently. And you try to take out what it is that makes sense and you go with that. And I was able to also get that opportunity from the Shiro's Academy, where you heard from your elders, you heard about the work that they've been doing and their journey and their path and how you want to learn from it, how you might do something differently. You speak to them, you say, you know, do you think that this is a good idea? Or we did this, what did you think about it? How do you think it resonated? What would you have done differently? So fostering conversations between those who've come before us, we that are in it now, and those who are coming up as well. There has to be a passing on of information. As you said, education, as Jada said, education is important, but it's not just something you learn in a classroom. You need life experiences, which you get from persons who are doing the work.
Yes, and I love the fact that you indicate that whilst the elders would have charted a path, it is youth who are leading youth-led activities. Absolutely.
So at Equality Youth, our focus is just to advocate for all youth, but our specific mandate is for LGBT young people. So what we've realized is, as an organization that does advocacy work, I think we thought it was time for young persons to actually advocate for themselves. So what we're currently doing now is we have a year-long social justice project, where we provide young people, queer young people, with tools, with capacity building activities, internships, where they pretty much get the opportunity to advocate for themselves, learn certain skills, have access to resources where they can advocate for themselves, advocate for whatever specific group they're attached to.
Okay.
At Talkapi, you know that we are one of the main drivers for youth inclusivity and just speaking up and just making youth voice known, right? We have worked with different programs, youth across Jamaica, and just to present their voices on topics that are considered taboo, hearing their voices, hearing how we can effect change in society. We have done that through a myriad of platforms, and we're continuing to reach out to the policymakers, let them hear, whether it's MPs, whether it is the different heads of government, how can youth be involved and how can youth make a change? So we have been doing that. And on a personal level, I've also helped students who are desirous of pursuing a tertiary education to gain scholarships. I know for a fact that I couldn't go to university without a scholarship, right? So just paying it forward, not giving back, but paying it forward because it's the future.
Jahmel?
I believe that youth should always be at the forefront, because we're here now, we're going to take over pretty soon. So we
Pretty soon, or have you taken over already?
taken over, but everybody have a different stage in what I realize with youth, we're at different stages in life. What I realize, opportunities now for youth should be meeting everybody at their stage. So if you're coming from an inner city, if you're coming from a different area, provide opportunities for them. Don't provide opportunities that is going to limit them to, like, for example, if you're a rural youth, you're going to limit me from getting opportunities as a rural youth because I'm not in Kingston. That can affect me, that can affect my decision making into policies that the government would use, that can affect me as a youth, because you're saying my voice doesn't matter because I live in the rural area. My voice do matter. And that brings back to the topic of representation. We need that in our society. And also we need to move away from tokenistic behavior. We need to have youths there and also listen to youths, because I've been to a lot of consultations and I haven't seen the execution of what they were planning to do. So I'm trying to see what's going on. I'm not saying that they're not doing what they're supposed to do, but also include us on the execution if that's the case. Have youths be there at every foundation. Give youths a voice, give youth something that they can volunteer to. Even as our fellow colleague would have said about a certificate, that would strengthen your LinkedIn profile, that would strengthen your resume, that would give you a up, because people care about your experience. It's not just about networking as well as youth. It's not about, and also please do not limit youth because they don't have their degree as yet, or they have their educational background, or they don't have the CXC that we glorify in Jamaica. And also, please revamp skills, because person thinking that skills is not crucial. It's very crucial. And I think Jamaica probably have problems with skills right now. It's at our all-time low because persons are having issues with adapting to skills. It's not everybody is going to attract to education.
Yeah.
You
want to weigh in on that? Yes, skills is seen as on, lower on the totem pole as opposed to academic qualifications and services as well. So it brings to the forum actually hearing volunteerism. I'm hearing skills also being an entry point for young people in some of these organizations. So when you send out a call for applications, you look for the most qualified person who has the masters and the CXCs and all the academic qualifications. So it begs the question, to what extent are we including skills as one of those priority areas for young people to enter some of these organizations? You want to weigh in here, Sean?
I think it starts with the educational system. For a lot of high schools, there's a lot of emphasis placed on subjects and not skills. So the high school that I went to, I will not call it, we didn't have much hands-on technical kind of stuff. It was all about the subjects. It was all about getting the tape. But I believe a lot of the things that would have been taught at other schools, so let us say like the less traditional, the non-traditional high schools, would have helped me. So for the other day, we were doing a little thing and I literally couldn't climb a ladder. Yes, I couldn't climb a ladder. And if they had been teaching stuff like woodwork or probably like metalwork, probably I could have done a little thing. Probably I could change a tire. I don't know how to do that, but if I were to read a book, how to change a tire, I could read it and tell you back. Yeah. So I think as it relates to skills development, we need to place a lot of emphasis on that and also provide it to our young people.
And you raise a very important point there. There needs to be a paradigm shift from just thinking that you have to be solely academic based in order to enter a certain sector of society. So we hear from time to time a number of ministers indicating that we do not have this skill set in Jamaica. But then when the young people present with these skill set and don't have the academics behind it, that is also a barrier for entry in many of these organizations.
So at WEChange, we are volunteer-based. We send out calls for volunteers all the time. We try to bring them into our team meetings. We try to separate them into different categories, depending on what they're interested in. So it starts with their interest and how much time they have that they can give us. And then we see what they're capable of. So if you are interested in communications, are you able to write? Are you able to help us change some long form report into more bite-sized, easily digestible information that your persons in your community are better able to understand? That is also a skill, right? Being able to relate to other people. So we look at what it is that you are good at, what it is that you're interested in, because that is where you're going to put your efforts and your passion. in terms of skills and the way that we educate our communities. You know, we have this issue where persons, they go to university and they come out and we cannot find a job because you want 12 years experience and we just left school. What do you mean? That's a barrier. And it's not just a barrier for youth. More specifically, it is a barrier for youth from, as we said, these inner city communities. They don't have the connections. They don't have anybody to say, I know that this person can do this job, give them a chance. We know persons from middle class societies, higher societies, they have those connections of, this is my friend, this is my daughter, give them a chance. We don't have anybody advocating for certain communities in that way. And so that's where organizations like ours come in. We give these persons a chance to show us what they can do, and then we can then present them to other persons and say, this is somebody who can be valuable to your organization, and they can go up that way. Go ahead,
So at Equality Youth, one of the things that we do is one of the activities is that we try to get our young people involved with policymakers and decision makers. So we go to the parliament and we try to have the young people speak to themselves. I don't want to be the person to be saying, boy, this is what she wants, this is what he, no, you speak, you have the opportunity now, use it to talk to these persons, let them know what your issues are, let them know what you think the solution should be, and want to work it out. I'm just here to probably just supervise you.
Supervise the process. So even putting young people in positions of leadership, because we know that age sometimes cloud the judgment that you are not capable because I am older than you. And so because of my seniority, you as a young person, you are not capable of coming in to share with me the avenues that I could take, which could lead to a better outcome.
Age where people believe that youth should be seen and not heard, we need to get rid of that.
Get rid of that.
Yes.
All right, so go ahead.
It's a large part of it. So teaching youth, you know, if you want to form your own organization, this is how you go about it. You have an opinion you want to write to the editor, this is how you write a letter to the editor. You want to go through this document and make a presentation to Parliament, again, this is how you show them how to do it, so that when these issues come up, they're not waiting for you to come and engage them. They have the tools to do it themselves.
Absolutely. All right, so before we go into our final segment, we would have asked for 3 recommendations, but in the interest of time, could you share 1 or 2 recommendations that you have for the United Nations to involve youth as partners in its work? So we heard some of it before, but we want to be very clear to say to the United Nations, these are some of the recommendations that we're putting forward, which we're asking you to consider in order to engage youth.
I would say my recommendation is going to be very simple, and I will focus on the issue that I've always seen. So I want us to remove the labels of unattached and also at-risk youths, and also revamped it and just call us youth, because you're not seeing persons from different areas, high-level areas, being called anything other than youth. So just give us our voice back, just make we feel safe in the space, because if youth from that area or youth from a certain areas that were given strong opportunities, and not saying that they weren't given strong opportunities, but opportunities that can build them, like capacity building and so on, and also give them youth advocate roles that they can really get into, not just because you're looking for a well-spoken person, or someone that can fit into your narrative, but get someone, just give us a chance, and just revamp that image and give us a chance, because you're always hearing that about inner city youth. You're not hearing about youth advocate, the next prime minister, the next person who is going to be great in society. You're always hearing at risk and attached. Always sending a message to me. You always need help. You always need someone there to fix your issues, rather than you there to fix your own issues. And not saying that they don't need your help, but also do it from an approach that they can also help themselves.
Absolutely. Certainly. And that presents a barrier for entry again, because if you are labeling me as an unattached youth, as a youth at risk, you are already clouding rather the judgment of persons around you in this space.
Yes, most definitely. And as Jahmel would have mentioned, giving youths the resources and toolkits that they need to also just enact change for themselves is very important. And what I'd also add is the longevity of programs. Many times we'll do something for 3 months and we don't follow back up. How did this really affect you? Did you have any suggestions for that? How can you go forward and also spread the knowledge of what you've learned to other persons? Because you might not be able to engage everybody, but how in engaging one person from innocently and having different representatives, how can you ensure that they go back and advocate on behalf of the rest of the youth? I think that's important.
That's important. So not just engaging you, but really following through.
All right, so my thing is this. I think the UN specifically could be a little bit more flexible as it relates to entry criteria for young people who want to volunteer. Every time there's a post, CXC, Cape. What about the young man who probably just want to build a house in Spanish Town? You know, give us certain flexibility to showcase the skills that we have that isn't necessarily book related.
Academically.
Right.
A variety of opportunities. One thing that I did like was the Sheroes Academy, being able to hear from and engage with persons older than ourselves doing the work, because oftentimes you don't know where to start, you don't know how to think about this really big problem, you don't think it's approachable, and so hearing from persons who have approached it is very helpful. But also to be very intentional with, I think this is something we're all saying, be very intentional with who you're engaging, where these youth are coming from, the issues that you're engaging them on. Try to find out what it is that is really worrying them, what it is that they are really trying to tackle. Right, we come with our own agendas and we don't really think of how that fits into their daily lives and their own struggles. So listen to youth, try to see from their point of view what it is that is really pressing, what is the pressing issue for them. And again, we might have a conversation and it seems surface level, but you dig a little deeper and you realize, okay, this is actually a structural issue that we can attack together.
All right, so we've heard quite a few things today. I'll throw out to our audience on the floor. Do you have any questions for our panelists? We'll only unfortunately be able to take one in the interest of time. So you're the, you are the lucky one.
We've heard a conversation. Youth need access to resources. And as someone who is a leader in a youth organization, funding to provide access to resources for other young persons within various communities, it's hard, it's difficult. From time to time, we'll see various grant proposals being put out or calls, but it's always in alignment to you being a part of an established organization that's not included. So I'm here thinking, okay, we know the problem, lack of access to resources. UN is here with access, can provide funding. So why not offer an opportunity for youth-led organizations to get grants that are designed specifically for us, so that we can then embark on these various initiatives and projects that are needed, because we've seen the problems and we've identified possible solutions, but we need assistance to bridge that gap. Well, to mobilize the resources to the people in the communities. Because as we've heard them say on the podium, if the persons are identified in need of help or in various communities that are far outside of Kingston, how are then we as young people to find the money to get a bus to pay to bring them to the training that we're trying to host in a place that needs money to pay for the rental, to get camera people to come and set up, to pay Tony to come and sign because they're like, Yes, so it will, if you can make the project proposals more simple so that we can actually understand it and just provide us opportunities so that we can have access to funding to execute and design our future.
So as we close, I'm going to share some salient points which I've heard from our panelists this afternoon. The first is removing labels that relates to unattached or saying at-risk youth. The other thing is providing equal opportunities for young people, fostering that equal opportunity, give opportunities to capitalize not only on the future, but talk about the present. We are not placeholders. Young people are saying we are not just there to tick the box because we have donor funding. We need to be meaningfully engaged from the stage of ideation all the way through to the project management cycle. We ought to be engaged. Volunteering is something I heard that spoke loudly in the room this afternoon as well. And a big one, we're talking about inclusivity, but have we really in this century redefined what inclusivity means for young people? Again, using technology to amplify youth voice. And lastly, we have a UN Youth 2030 strategy. We ought to localize that for it to make sense and mean something for youth in Jamaica. This afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for joining us. I want to thank Mr. Jahmel Brown, Mr. Sean Lorde, Dave and Moses, and Miss Jada Powell. Please give them a round of applause.
Thank you.
I have been your moderator for this afternoon. I'm Kerry-Ann Willis, and do have yourself a wonderful afternoon.
Coastal communities by improving livelihood sectors of fisheries and ecotourism. To secure these smart investments, mobilizing partnerships with the private sector, civil society, and